Wyoming Territory, May of 1877. The rain had not let up in hours. Holland Derry stood alone on the muddy hillside, her black dress soaked through, her boots sinking deeper with each step. The iron cross at her mother's grave was crooked, the fresh dirt unsettled by the storm. She had not brought an umbrella, she did not care to. She dropped to her knees beside the grave, her fingers clutching the wet earth. "I am sorry," she whispered, the words torn out of her chest. "I did not come sooner." Thunder rolled low through the valley. The wind tugged her hair free from its pins. The sky did not care that her mother was dead. She did not hear the horse until it slowed behind her. The rider dismounted without a word. His boots squelched in the mud as he approached, leading the horse by the reins. He stopped a respectful distance away, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. "I have dug graves too," he said quietly. Holland blinked up at him. His voice was deep, rough, but steady. He looked somewhere near 30, lean and tall, with a coat darkened by the storm. His face was calm. Not cold, not pitiful, just sure. "I do not need help," she said, though her voice broke. He nodded once. "Maybe not, but you should not be out here alone." Lightning cracked across the sky behind him, flashing white against the hills. She looked away, her fingers were trembling. "I could not leave her," she said after a moment. "She waited all these years and I still came too late." The man stepped closer, slow and careful. "You are not too late, you are here now." She did not answer. The rain pulsed on, steady as a heartbeat. "I am Vayden Lorne," he added. "My ranch is across the ridge. I saw you ride past this morning." She looked at him again. "Holland Derry," he tipped his hat. "I will help you get out of this rain, Miss Derry." She shook her head. "I cannot leave her yet." Something shifted in his face, not pity, understanding. "Then I will stay." He tied his horse to a nearby fence post and sat cross-legged a few feet away, rain falling between them. He did not speak, he did not move, he just stayed. It was nearly dark when she finally rose to her feet, stiff and soaked through. Her hands were caked in mud. Her heart ached dull and low, like a bruise under her ribs. Vayden stood, brushing off his coat. "I will ride with you back to town." "I am not going to town," she said. He frowned. "Then where?" "I do not know yet." He hesitated. "You have somewhere to stay." She looked away from him. "No, my place is not far. It is dry. You can rest." She opened her mouth to refuse, but her legs wobbled under her and her head spun with fatigue. She had not eaten all day. She had not slept in too. "All right," she said quietly. He helped her onto his horse, then mounted behind her. They rode in silence through the rain, the hills rolling dark around them. The wind had grown colder. His ranch was quiet, a plain wooden house tucked between cottonwoods. He led her inside, lit a lamp, and stepped back to give her space. The heat from the fireplace reached her slowly. "You can take the room at the end of the hall," he said. "There's a dry quilt on the bed." She nodded, her arms wrapped tight around herself. He paused, then added, "I will be up early. You sleep as long as you need." She turned to him. "Why are you being kind to me?" He met her eyes. "Because grief should not be carried alone." She stood in the hallway a long time after he left. The silence of the house settled around her, soft and unfamiliar. She touched the wall as she walked, steadying herself. The bed was small but warm. She peeled off her wet clothes, dried herself with a cloth by the washbasin, and wrapped the quilt around her shoulders. Her mother's face was still in her mind, but the sharp edge of it had dulled. She did not cry again that night. Morning brought sun and dry wind. Holland stepped outside wrapped in a shawl. The land stretched wide, golden and endless. Vayden was already in the corral, saddling a chestnut mare. "You ride?" he asked. "I do," he nodded. "She is gentle. You can borrow her while you are here." She tilted her head. "You are assuming I will stay." "I am hoping you will," he said simply. She blinked. No one had hoped for her in a long time. Over the next week, Holland stayed. She cleaned out the barn with him. She helped mend a broken fence. She cooked supper while he worked the fields. The quiet between them stayed, but it softened less distance, more comfort. One evening, as the sun dropped low, they sat on the porch steps with cups of coffee. The sky was streaked orange and purple. "My mother was not buried," she said suddenly. "Not properly. Not until I came back." He glanced at her but said nothing. She was a maid in town, worked herself to the bone, and when she died, no one claimed her. The sheriff buried her in a patch of nothing behind the church. Vayden's jaw tightened. I was 13 when I was sent east. My aunt never let me come back. I only found her grave last week, he nodded slow. That is why you stayed at the grave. She nodded back. He looked down at his hands. I buried my brother when I was 17, dug the hole myself. That is when I found out how heavy silence can be. She reached out, fingers brushing his arm. I am sorry. He looked at her, really looked. You are not alone anymore, Holland. Her breath caught. The wind rustled the cottonwoods, soft and steady. I do not know how to start again, she whispered. You do not have to know, he said. You just have to choose. The next morning she chose. She rode out to the grave one last time. She brought flowers, wild ones picked from the pasture. She knelt beside the cross, laid them down, and whispered, I am all right now. And she meant it. When she turned back, Vayden was there, waiting at the fence line. His eyes met hers, steady and warm. She walked to him, her heart light for the first time in years. You came, she said. I will always come for you, he said. She smiled, and for the first time it stayed. The grain sacks were heavier than she'd judged. Holland leaned her weight into the lift, her arms straining, breath short in the dry morning air. Vayden stepped in without a word, taking the bulk of the weight from her arms and settling the sack neatly into the wagon bed. I had it, she muttered, brushing her palms on her skirt. He didn't look at her, just went back for the next sack. Didn't say you didn't. They worked that way through the morning, loading feed and hauling water until the sun stood high and the horses stood dozing in the shade of the barn. Holland wiped her brow with the edge of her sleeve, glancing toward the ridge where the land fell away to the creek. She hadn't known how far the land stretched from the house out here. The distance had shape and sound. The wind carried dust and the call of a hawk circling far above them. Vayden secured the last sack and leaned against the wagon, arms folded. You can ride fence with me this afternoon if you want. It's not polite work, but it's quiet. She tilted her head. You always offer something to fill the silence. His mouth curved faintly. You always seem like you've got something to outrun. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached for the reins and climbed up to the driver's bench. He joined her without another word, and they set off toward the far pasture. The grass grew taller along the fence line, waving pale in the breeze. A group of antelopes scattered at their approach, white tails flashing before they vanished into the hills. Vayden dismounted and began inspecting a warped post. Holland stayed seated, watching the sky stretch wide and blue above them. How long have you had this place? She asked when he returned to the wagon. Since after the war, he said. Bought it from a man who didn't have sons and didn't want to see it fall into the wrong hands. She looked at him then. What did he see in you? Vayden's eyes flicked toward the horizon. I showed up with a busted shoulder and a shovel. Said I'd work sunup to sundown for the chance to sleep under a roof. He let me stay. After 2 years, he sold me the land. Why'd he trust you? I never asked for anything I didn't earn. She watched the shadows shift under his eyes, the way his hands stilled when he said it. You never left the territory? No reason to, he said. The land's quiet. Doesn't lie to you. They rode the fence until the sun began to sink. At the far corner of the pasture, they stopped and sat beside a cottonwood, the wagon creaking as it settled. Holland picked at the hem of her sleeve, the wind tugging loose strands of her hair. Did you ever think about marrying? She asked. Vayden didn't flinch. Thought about it. Why didn't you? He turned a small stone over in his hand. The kind of man I used to be wasn't fit for a family. Took me a long time to become someone who could hold still. She studied the line of his jaw, the way he didn't avoid her gaze. I wasn't sure I'd be welcome back here, she said. Not after all the years gone, not after leaving her behind. You didn't leave her behind, he said. You were forced out. I still should have found a way, he nodded once. You're here now, that's what matters. The wind shifted. Holland looked out over the hills where the last of the light painted the grass in gold. You ever think about leaving now? She asked. No, he said. Not unless I had a reason. She turned her face toward him, waiting. His voice stayed low. But I might if you asked me to. She didn't smile. But her hand found his on the bench between them, fingers curling slow and certain. I'm not asking, she said. Not yet. He didn't let go. Then I'll stay. They didn't speak again as the sun dipped below the edge of the earth. The silence between them was no longer something to fill. It held the shape of something settling in like roots, like trust. The wind carried a scent of pine and smoke as Holland stepped out into the morning, her shawl gathered tight around her shoulders. The grass still held dew, and in the hollow below the barn, a thin mist clung to the earth like breath not yet exhaled. She followed the faint trail down from the fence line, boots pressing soft into the damp ground. Vayden had mentioned the spring-fed pond below the ridge, and now that the chores were done and the sky held promise, she wanted to see it for herself. She found him already there, kneeling by a fallen branch, a hatchet in hand. The bark came away in clean strips under his grip. You always work this early? She asked. He didn't turn. This tree came down in the storm last week. If I don't clear it, the cattle'll miss the water come summer. She watched him finish, the hatchet biting clean. His sleeves were rolled, forearms lined with old scars that caught the light in pale threads. I never learned to split wood, she said. My mother said it wasn't a woman's concern. He stood and wiped his hands on a cloth. She'd teach you other things. She taught me how to keep a fire going, no matter how green the wood, how to stretch a meal when there's nothing left in the cellar. How to keep your voice calm when someone's looking to break you. Vayden nodded, eyes on hers. Sounds like she knew what mattered. She did, Holland said, her voice steady, even if no one else thought so. They walked back toward the house side by side. He didn't offer help. She didn't need it. Near the corral, a letter sat tucked between the boards of the porch rail. She spotted it first and reached for it. The paper was creased, the address faded from the sun. Her name was written in a careful hand she didn't recognize. She turned it over twice before opening it. Vayden stayed quiet, watching her face. It's from my aunt, she said after a moment, folding it closed again. She heard I came west, wants me to return. He waited. She says I should come back before I settle into anything too permanent. She says this life isn't fit for a woman raised in a proper house. He leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed. You want to go? I don't think she knows who I am anymore, Holland said, not looking at him. And I don't think I ever belonged in that house. Vayden didn't move. You don't have to explain yourself to me. She let the letter fall into the ash bucket by the door. I'm not. Later, she found him by the stream, mending a saddle strap with a piece of rawhide. She crouched beside him, brushing her skirt aside. What happened to your shoulder? She asked. He didn't answer right away, just tied off the knot and ran his thumb along the seam. Chickamauga, he said finally. Rifle ball took me down. I laid between two tree roots for a day and a half before they pulled me out. She watched his hands. You were a soldier, he nodded once. Confederate infantry. Not because I believed in it, because I was 17 and the landowner told my father it was his duty. Did you lose anyone? Everyone, he said. The silence between them stretched. She didn't try to fill it. I was engaged once, he said, eyes still on the leather. Before the war, her family moved west while I was off fighting. When I came back, she was already married to someone else. Holland lowered her gaze. That kind of grief doesn't leave easy, he nodded. But it leaves if you let it. She reached over and covered his hand with hers. The leather was warm beneath their joined palms. I want something real, Vayden, she said. I don't want to be someone passing through. You're not, he said. Not to me. That night they ate by lantern light, no words passed. But when she rose to clear the table, he caught her hand and held it, just long enough for her to hold back. She stayed. Without asking, without needing permission. And when she lay in the bed that night, listening to the wind shift through the cottonwoods, she knew the ache in her chest had changed. It was no longer emptiness. It was something growing. Something rooted. 3 days passed before Holland asked about the ledger. She found it while sweeping the front room, tucked beneath a stack of old newspapers in the corner cabinet. The leather binding was worn, the ink faded in places. She turned it over in her hands, then set it on the table without opening it. When Vayden came in from tending the north pasture, his shoulders dusted with hay, she only said, "You keep records." He hung his hat on the hook by the door and stepped over to the basin. "Started when I first bought the land," he said, rinsing the grit from his hands. "Didn't have much to track in the beginning, a few head of cattle, half a dozen chickens." She pulled out a chair and sat, her hands folded. "It's kept in a careful hand." He dried off with a cloth and joined her. "My mother had fine penmanship. Made me practice with a piece of charcoal until I could write straight without a line." "Did she teach you to read too?" "She did. Said a man who couldn't read was easy to cheat." Holland traced a finger along the ledger's edge. "I never saw a woman's script in the East that wasn't pressed into something rigid. Yours has motion." Vayden watched her hands. "She used to say that lines without breath were lines without meaning." She opened the book, careful not to strain the spine. The pages told the story of the ranch, whether notations, calf births, broken tools mended, costs tallied with exactness. In one corner, a faint sketch of a plow horse took up the margin. "You drew this," she said. He nodded. "Old mare, died 2 winters back. She was stubborn as anything, but she never let me down." Holland closed the book gently. "You keep things that matter close." "I try to." She stood then, stepped to the window where the light fell across the floor in a long, golden blade. The land beyond stretched quiet, fence lines trailing like thread over the ridges. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked, not turning. "I think about what I'd like to build," he said. "Not just fix." She glanced back over her shoulder. "And what is it you'd build?" He stood slowly, sliding the ledger back into its place. "A house with room for someone else's boots by the door. A stretch of land with more than cattle to keep me company. And if someone asked to stay, I'd put her name beside mine in the book," he said, "and never make her wonder if she belonged." She stepped closer, slowly. "I've never been someone's name on a page. You've always been more than that," he said. "You just needed someone to see it." She let the words settle. That evening, she followed him to the edge of the pasture where the soil turned dark and rich near the creek. He'd been setting fence posts there earlier, and now the tools lay forgotten in the grass. "I want to plant something," she said. He didn't question her, just handed her the spade. She knelt in her skirt, fingers firm in the dirt, and dug a shallow furrow. He crouched beside her, working the soil with a quiet patience. "I brought seeds," she said, pulling a small cloth sack from her pocket. "Beans. My mother kept them in a tin. I took them with me when they sent me east." Vayden reached for the earth, cupping a handful. "This ground'll take them." She pressed the seeds into the furrow, one by one. His hand settled near hers, steady and warm. When they finished, the light had gone silver. The air held the hush of something sacred. He stood and offered his hand. She took it. They walked back to the house, not speaking. Inside, the fire was low. She lit a single lamp, its glow softening the room. He stood by the hearth, watching her. "I don't want to leave," she said. "You don't have to. I want to stay because I choose to. Not because I've lost everything else." He stepped forward. "Then choose." She reached up, her palm against his cheek. "I choose you." His arms came around her slowly, not claiming but holding. Her breath eased against him. Outside, the night deepened. Inside, something rooted itself, quiet and sure. The first frost came early. Thin bands of ice traced the edges of the water trough, and the horse's breath turned visible in the morning chill. Holland stood on the porch, a wool shawl drawn firm around her shoulders, watching Vayden hitch the team to the wagon. His collar was turned up against the wind, his hat pulled low, but he moved with a steadiness that no cold could touch. He looked up and caught her eye. "We'll need to haul wood before sundown. The cellar's near empty." "I'll go with you. I've never seen the pine grove that far out." He tied the last loop and walked up to her. "It's rough country near the edge, but worth the ride. Trees grow thick out there." "Quiet kind of place." She stepped down beside him. "I like quiet. It leaves room for a person to think." They rode out past the far pasture where the fence turned crooked and the land sloped into a narrow draw. The wheels crunched over patches of frozen grass, and behind them, the scent of smoke from their own chimney faded into the hills. The grove stood at the base of a rocky rise, tall and close-grown. Snow clung to the northern sides of the trunks. Vayden handed her a pair of gloves before they began. She didn't ask how he knew hers were too thin. They worked with rhythm. He swung the axe, and she gathered the split logs, stacking them neat in the wagon bed. The cold stung her cheeks, but she didn't mind. Her breath came fast, but her muscles moved with purpose. When he paused to wipe his brow, she leaned against a stump and watched the light shift through the trees. "I've never had a season that felt like it belonged to me," she said. He set the axe down, breathing hard. "You do now." She looked at him then, really looked. His face was roughened by wind and sun, lines carved deep around his eyes, but there was something open in him now, something that hadn't been there when they met. "I want to build something here," she said. "Not just live on what's already been made." "You already are," he said. "Every time you choose this place, you're building it." They didn't speak again until the wagon was full. On the ride back, she lay her hand on his knee, her fingers steady even as the road jostled beneath them. He covered her hand with his and left it there. By the end of the week, the ground froze solid. Holland spent the afternoon stitching new curtains from a bolt of homespun she found in the attic, while Vayden repaired the barn roof ahead of snowfall. When he came in one evening with a torn coat sleeve and a bloodied knuckle, she didn't scold. She cleaned the cut with boiled water and wrapped it in fresh linen, her touch careful, her silence full of understanding. He watched her tie the knot. "You've turned this house into something different. You make it easy to stay," she said. That night, he brought out a small wooden box from the back of the wardrobe. Inside was a locket with a faded daguerreotype on one side and a folded slip of paper on the other. "My mother's," he said. "I've kept it with me since I was a boy." Holland opened the locket and traced the etched initials with her thumb. "You want to give this to me? I want to give you what matters, and I've only got one thing left that ever did." She closed it gently and slipped it into her apron pocket. "I'll keep it safe." They were married at the end of November. The preacher rode out from town, his coat lined with rabbit fur and his saddle creaking from the cold. They stood under the cottonwood where they'd first planted the beans, now long gone to frost, and Vayden said the words with a voice that didn't waver. Holland's hands were warm in his. She wore a slate blue dress stitched at the cuffs with thread from her mother's sewing tin. Only the crows in the trees and the hush of the wind answered them when it was done, but neither of them needed more than that. Winter settled in deep after that, but the house stayed warm. Holland filled the shelves with dried herbs and stoneware jars, while Vayden finished the second room off the kitchen, turning it into a space for her garden tools, and the seed tins she kept wrapped in oilcloth. Sometimes in the long evenings, they sat before the fire and read aloud from the books he'd kept boxed in the attic. She read slower than him, but he never corrected her, only turned the pages when she was ready. One night she looked up from the print and said, "Do you ever think we might have a child?" He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "I'd raise them with you, teach them the names of stars and the way to mend a plow handle. Show them how to hold still when someone's hurting. I'd teach them how to start a fire in wet wood," she said, smiling faintly. "How to listen before they speak." He reached across and brushed her cheek with his fingers. Then they'd be all right. The first spring they planted together, the beans came up stronger than she remembered. She worked the soil each morning while he saw to the calves in the lower field. By June, the vines had reached the top of the poles, and Holland stood barefoot in the rows, her hands dirt-streaked, her heart full. They built a life slow and without spectacle. But it held. In the evenings, she leaned against him on the porch and watched the dusk settle soft over the hills. His hand always found hers, and when he whispered her name, it carried the weight of everything they'd chosen, everything they'd left behind, and everything they'd built with nothing but time and quiet love. They never spoke of the past again, not because they forgot, but because it no longer followed them. And in the years that came, when the wind turned cold and the trees dropped their leaves, they stayed side by side, rooted deep in land that no longer felt borrowed. Their home never grew larger than it needed to, but it never lacked for warmth, or for the steady sound of two hearts having found each other after long sorrow, beating as one.